Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Smart Justice Ballot Power webinar. This is the second of 4 of our webinar series that are being offered for CE credit through the National Association of Social Workers. So if you are attending for that credit, I would tell you now to go ahead and drop your name in the chat so I can be sure to forward your information along. So this is going to be a 1-hour event. We'll wrap up around 7:30 with our 3 panelists. At any time throughout the event, if you have questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A so I can be sure to get to them after we finish the discussion. So just for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and jump right in it. I'll have each one of the panelists introduce themselves really briefly. And just to start off, my name is Mira Devota. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the ACLU Voter Campaign Manager. Our first panelist is John Reynolds. John, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. John Reynolds, he, him, and I'm the Clean Slate Delaware Campaign Manager here at the ACLU Delaware.
Thank you.
And wonderful to be here with you all tonight.
Thanks. Hanif, do you want to go ahead?
Hanif Salam, Campaign for Smart Justice Manager, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And Shannon? Shannon, are you there? Okay, hopefully Shannon can join us. Shannon is one of our Smart Justice. Oh, there she is.
Hi, sorry about that.
You're
Apologies. There we go. Oh, here we are. Fantastic.
Shannon, do you want to just tell everyone what your role is real quick?
I often wonder what that is on a daily basis. Just kidding. So I am here to expand on what our Smart Justice Ambassador does for ACLU and help that with that I can educate those that need a little more knowledge in order to make a change in the laws and policies, starting at the very basic, at the very bottom, where everybody just needs a little more education. That's what it is. Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Shannon. And Shannon, as she said, is one of our Smart Justice Ambassadors. We are currently recruiting for our second cohort of Smart Justice Ambassadors. So if Shannon's role is something that interests you, I'll definitely have that link in the chat for you later. So to start us off, our first question of the night, I'm going to go ahead and read it out for our panelists, and whoever it speaks to, go ahead and jump onto it. Too many Delaware residents have been adversely affected by the justice system, a system that disproportionately impacts people of color. Before we begin, can you give us a better understanding of the current landscape in Delaware when it comes to police transparency, accountability, and second chances for system-involved individuals? Where have we seen successes and what barriers still remain?
I could start with that. I think one thing that's important to note when you talk about the culture of law enforcement in Delaware and our General Assembly is more than half of our elected legislators in the General Assembly are either retired law enforcement, currently connected to a law enforcement agency, or has a family member that is retired or current law enforcement. So it kind of adds an unfair bias when it comes to police reform, to Leopold amendments and things of this nature. Now, where we have seen minor successes is in the areas of body camera legislation, which is a law that all of our officers in the state of Delaware are supposed to be utilizing and being equipped with body cameras, although we still have departments that are not. So, I mean, that was a somewhat success. We do have new use of force legislation that changed the language in our use of force statement, but some say we could have had stronger. So that was also somewhat of a success. So while there have been minor steps towards trying to change policing to create more transparency and accountability, we have really been faced with the obstacle and challenges of our legislature being heavily influenced by law enforcement.
I think just kind of building off what Hanif was saying too, and talking a little bit more about issues around fines and fees and records and how they're used. I think it's really important to think about the full scale of the legal system in Delaware and the number of people it touches. So our best estimates, up to 400,000 Delawareans have some form of a record. And what is a record? A record means that an individual had some type of interaction with law enforcement that either started with an arrest or a charge. It may have gone no farther than that. It may have been dropped, or they never pursued it beyond that initial arrest, or it could have been something that resulted in a conviction. But nevertheless, up to 400,000 folks in Delaware fall into this category. And we're not a huge state, so that's 900 or 950,000, 990,000 people, so less than a million. So we're talking more than up to as many as 4 in 10 Delawareans having some type of record, right? So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of interactions with law enforcement, with police. So the things that Hanif was talking about accountability and all of that, I just want to reiterate, it's so important because these interactions are happening so frequently. We have no accountability and no transparency. It's really hard to call something a justice system. The second thing, now we're talking about after these records exist, we're going to talk a little bit more later about the impacts it has on people's lives, but there have been successes in navigating the collateral consequences that come with a record. They have been steps, I'd say, not final destinations, but we have seen for fines and fees this past year, was passed a bill that eliminated certain fines and certain fees. It also made it so that driver's licenses were no longer automatically suspended for failure to pay a fine or a fee. And that was a really huge step because Delaware charges lots of fines and fees. It's a big way about how we fund lots of things in our state. So this was a really important step to start Delaware down a path of really thinking about the impacts when we fund our systems on the backs of the people least able to afford to pay. The next thing, again, as I mentioned, records. We did have success back in 2021. Senator Darius Brown introduced 2 bills that expanded upon previous legislation around expungements and made it so that starting in August of 2024, we will now have a form of automatic expungement in Delaware. This is really important because one of the biggest challenges for people who are eligible is not actually becoming eligible to apply for an expungement, it's the actual application process. So Delaware will still have some folks that are required to do petitions, but we have created that really important avenue for automatic expungements that allows people who have done the hard work of being eligible after a conviction or who were never convicted in the first place, the ability to successfully receive that expungement and have a true second chance with a clean record.
Thank you, John. Shannon, did you want to weigh in on this question? I can also repeat it. I think you're muted, Shannon. I know, it's always—
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you repeat the question, please? Because I want to make sure
Absolutely.
that I don't repeat what they said.
Totally fine. Yeah. Just in a really brief summary, what is the current landscape when it comes to transparency and accountability in Delaware? Where have we seen successes? And in your opinion, what barriers still remain?
Okay, so definitely Hanif and John definitely hit the key points as far as landscape and successes. Due to the fact that I spent some time behind bars and bailers, I personally felt some injustices where the lack of accountability inside the Department of Corrections takes a toll on a human being's life in tremendous ways. Because when a human being is wronged inside a facility and there's nobody there to say, hey, that's wrong, or hey, are you going to be fixing this problem? And nobody does, because that is something that I did experience. And it happens more times than just once. It happens to a lot of people. And these are human lives. And it doesn't just affect the person that is behind bars, it affects the whole entire community. It affects their families. It affects our pocketbooks and taxes and having programs available, everything, it's just a big ripple effect. And when it came to coming back home, the system has failed us in many, many ways. Just re-entry alone. They knew I was leaving at a certain date, yet only a week before I was about to leave, did somebody come to me to see what I needed. A week? A week is not long enough time. The Department of Corrections is understaffed, and they can't get done what they need to get done on a daily, let alone trying to foresee what somebody needs for the future. The staff is just not there, not just for reentry, but for those that suffer from any type of co-occurring disorders. We're not a mental facility. They are not equipped to handle people that have some mental health issues going on top of any type of drug or alcohol addiction. And then coming home, well, once again, the system failed because of technicalities and my life that I had put in order, and I did A, B, C, and D without any type of transgressions, but because there was a technical blip, the judge so referred to it as a blip, I was not able to graduate when I was told I was supposed to. So all these plans that I had to be put on the back burner. Once again, failing. The system failed. And there's many facets that seem so minor, like transportation. Transportation is a huge issue. Affordable housing, another huge issue. Those types of things are still here, and they are still not being addressed as well as they should be.
Jen,
That's all I got.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and thank you, John and Hanif, for your answers on that question as well. Our next question touches on LIBOR, which is a pretty big conversation within the realm of our work on justice reform. Under the current laws in Delaware, the public is not guaranteed any transparency in a police-involved incident. In fact, Delaware's Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, also known as LIBOR, makes public access to police investigations impossible. So this is kind of a two-part, and I'll start with the first one. What does this mean for our ability as voters and residents of Delaware to hold police accountable for their actions?
John, you want to go ahead and swing at that first?
So I would say that for this, in the question of sorry, Mira, I apologize.
That's totally fine. Do you need a refresher on the question?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Absolutely. So given the state of LIBOR, what does this mean for our ability as voters and residents of Delaware to hold police accountable for their actions? Yeah, so I mean, there was actually a recent thing put out by the Marshall Project, which, for folks who don't know, it's a daily email blast of journalists specifically focusing on issues involving the legal system. They talked about in Delaware the number of state agencies that have reported just all of their data for the year of 2021. And that investigation found that 0% of Delaware's entirety of Delaware law enforcement agencies have reported all of the data to the FBI about their interactions with community members and arrests and all of that data. 0% have reported all 12 months. So I think that this indicates, as we go to think then about, this is not even diving into the deep part of LIBOR, but just this idea of accountability and transparency, and an issue that we have in Delaware, specifically around policing, is we don't have a very robust culture of law enforcement agencies actually sharing data about what they do. And then we're asked to trust them. And this is hard because we see in the news frequently, far more frequently than we like, and probably even less frequently than actually happens, terrible interactions that Delawareans have with police officers. And we see at times people losing their lives, experiencing severe injuries. And then we're being told again,
that we can't see these records. We can't learn about these investigations. We can't even know how many of these investigations exist. And again, we're just told to trust them. And so this is a really, I think, difficult way to set up a relationship if it's going to be based around trust. And the whole idea of transparency and accountability is not one that's unfamiliar to us in our own lives. It's something that we're asked to practice every day in our jobs, in our relationships with our families and our friends and our communities. We're often asked to be accountable, to be transparent about why we're doing things and what we've done in regards to perhaps things we've done wrong. And I mean, I'm all for, I mean, I'm the guy who talks every day about second chances. Yes. And I'm not saying that they should never exist, but it's hard to even talk about second chances if we don't know what we're talking about in the first place.
And Mara, that's why I put John on the spot, because I was just going to say voters can't see anything that police do. But John so eloquently broke it down to us to let us know it impacts the voters much more deeply.
Agreed. Well, just to spiral off of that question, now that we are talking about voters and we are talking about the upcoming elections, what reforms are we looking for? So what reforms should lawmakers champion to enhance and ensure accountability and transparency when we head to the polls on September 13th, on November 8th? What are we looking for in these candidates?
And the key word you said is reforms with an S, because there is no one single answer to all of this. Of course, we know that we have been trying to advance SB 149, which was created to be able to amend Leobor and change the FOIA rules to allow for transparency among police departments by sharing police misconduct records, as well as creating effective community oversight boards. That bill was heavily challenged and then eventually watered down. Then the community came together and said, we don't want to see this, so it ended up being taken off the table totally. But one thing that's important to note when we talk about who we're voting in is Delaware legislators often have task force that they like to put together to really understand the issue. And I want to clear up a big misconception of Delaware's Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force, because they actually came up with 7 recommendations that I hope to see our legislators champion laws that will implement these recommendations. Restructure and expand the Council on Police Training to include more civilians and provide more authority in directing a law enforcement officer at a minimum. Create policies creating civilian review boards for local law enforcement agencies. Review and amend the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights to increase transparency and accountability in police disciplinary process. Create a law enforcement officer disciplinary database that at a minimum provides law enforcement agencies with access for hiring decisions. Law enforcement agencies would need to input both substantiated and unsubstantiated complaints and the accompanying disciplinary actions. Increase the public's access to already public decertification decisions made by the Council on Police Training. And create a public-facing law enforcement agency database to provide the public with information on citizens' complaints made, substantiated complaints, unsubstantiated complaints, and disciplinary actions for each law enforcement agency. And this was recommendations that were accepted by this task force March 4th of 2021. So we need legislators that are going to champion the things that they say that they really want to do.
Shannon, if I could kind of put you on the spot, when you cast your ballots, when you head to the polls, what do you look for in the candidates that you vote for in regards to their smart justice platforms? Oh no, Shannon, you're still on mute. It's horrible, I know.
Hi, can you hear me now? Fantastic. So voting for me for a long time, it didn't take place because I was one of those people that said, oh, my vote, nah, it doesn't matter. how narrow-minded I was a long time ago. And because of my experience in the law and outside of the law, I have realized and come to understand the law much better so that I know my vote does count. And when I go to the ballots, I want to see somebody who's walking the walk. I mean, let's be frank, just like everybody wants, they want a representative who's going to do what they say they're going to do. I look for somebody who's been in office for a long period of time that has that reputation. I want somebody that's going to listen to the constituents, that's going to take the time to go out and be on the front lines to see what's happening and not just go by hearsay. I want somebody that's going to say, hey, here I am. What can I do for you? And it's been my experience. Some are like that, but not enough.
John, I don't want to skip over you if you have something to add on this question too.
I mean, what am I looking for? I think Shannon said it pretty well, and Hanif has already kind of laid out how you can see who's walking the walk and who's merely talking the talk. We have these different task force. Delaware loves a good task force. I mean, come on. So we got these task force that are laying out these agreed upon priorities that have been worked over, and there has been a certain amount of community involvement in developing these, and there has been thought put into them. And too often, especially in the context of what happened with Leobor, there's not real action taken upon the results of these task force. We've talked the talk. We've said what needs to be done and what needs to be fixed. And I agree with Shannon that when you go, I would encourage others to also think and look about, who has merely said they're going to support police reform and who has actually done it. Go and look at the Vote Delaware website, and Mira is continuously getting more and more responses to the questionnaires we put out. See who is committing to actually vote in support of reforms to Leobor, and read what they're saying are the reforms they want to see. These are all things that definitely are part of my thought process, and I would encourage others, especially those who care about these issues, to take advantage of some of the resources that Mira and the Vote Delaware campaign has been putting together to help people understand who's actually doing what they say they're going to do.
Thank you all. And John makes a really good point that we are here as a resource for you. So along with our campaign hub page, you are more than welcome to contact us, email us, ask questions. We're here as a resource to make sure that you're casting informed and confident ballots come September and November. Moving right along now, we're going to kind of switch gears to talk about probation for a while. So the probation system in Delaware is simply not making Delaware safer. Instead, it's costing the state millions of dollars that could be spent on victim services and community-based treatment and rehabilitation programs. So again, kind of a two-parter, and I'm going to start with this. In what ways does Delaware's broken probation system affect individuals when returning home after incarceration, preventing successful reentry?
Shannon, I think you're a perfect one to start for this one. We could repeat the question if you need, Shannon, and take it back off mute. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, I did touch briefly on that earlier on a question. And I'll reiterate the fact that the reentry system coming out of the prison is so behind. It is not well equipped with DOC officers in order for you to get to where you need to go. Literally, they walk you to where you need to go one at a time. And if there's not enough officers there, you're not going anywhere. And sometimes they might have staff for reentry come to you. Not very often and not as frequently as they need to be. On top of that, the information that is given to the reentry employees, they're not up to date. I had more information than the reentry person working for the Department of Corrections. That's because I have a very large network. I've been in recovery for a long time, and I keep up with those things. I have sponsees, and I have a sponsor, yada, yada, yada. Coming home, that's another scenario. Like I said, transportation, especially if you live in Sussex County, things are far away. And when you have to go to Georgetown from Laurel, Seaford, to go to probation once a week, to go to task once a week, to go to, oh my gosh, I had a brain fart. Sorry guys, give me a minute. DUI classes, any of that stuff. And when you have to do all of it one time a week, that's 4 or 5 times. You got to be in a town without transportation. The bus system does not ride down here like it does in Newcastle. It's not frequent. No, it is not. And in September, it shuts down. Yes, it does. On top of that, the communication between the different sectors, I guess, different programs like task and probation, they don't communicate. I wish that there was a database that all of them could mainstream, which has all of our histories, because my history doesn't change. My criminal history does not change. And every time I got to sit in front of a probation officer, every time I got to sit in front of a task worker, every time I got to sit in front of a counselor, I have to reiterate over and over again my criminal history. And I often said to myself, I wish I had one made up like a resume, because I get tired of saying it. And it doesn't seem like they communicate amongst one another at all. And let's talk about probation when it comes to fairness. We have probation officers that are there that want to see you succeed. Yes, they are there. And I've had the pleasure of having great probation officers. I've also had the pleasure of having not so great probation officers that strictly by the book, they did not budge. It almost seemed like they didn't want you to succeed. Not a kind word, made you feel like you were fearing for your life instead of succeeding in your life. I didn't cause any trouble. I didn't have one transgression, nothing. I finished early. I paid all my fines and my fees. Yet, I had a certain probation officer that made me feel like I was doing something wrong. That's not okay. Most of us are already traumatized when we go through those doors for some reason or another. And all it does is add onto the trauma that we're already trying to work through. I know years back, they started the trauma-informed acts inside the facilities, and they were teaching their employees how to be kinder. Well, I wish they would enforce that a little bit more through the whole spectrum. Probation, Department of Corrections, the officers there, even the wardens, all the way down to the nursing staff. We've had a rough life, all of us, whether we've been behind bars or not. The last thing we need is somebody else putting us down. I think it's enough for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. And one thing I want to touch on with our probation system that I think is often overlooked, we have a large amount of people who serve probation who are like only serving probation until they fulfill other requirements, right? So you have people who are on probation until they pay all of their fines and fees, right? You have people who are on probation until they complete a DUI class, or on probation until they complete an anger management class. And oftentimes these classes or these extra requirements are financially related. As I said, it'd be fines, fees, it'd be restitution, it'd be the requirement of doing the class. And oftentimes we don't need to supervise these individuals. What we should be doing is ensuring that they have the resources to get the help and to be able to attend the classes that have been identified necessary to help them and to treat them. So we have to stop holding people on probation while we're waiting for them to meet some type of financial obligation or to meet some financial need to complete a program.
Absolutely. Agreed 100%.
The kind of, oh, Hanif, did you have something else to add? No, I think, okay, never mind. To kind of steer from that, while we're talking about probation reform, I would love us to be more specific in terms of what that means, because sometimes we use these really big words, and when it comes down to describing what it looks like, it could be great for as voters to actually be able to look at something and say, that's it, that's what it looks like. So what does probation reform actually look like this election season? When we head to the polls in just a few weeks, what policies should we be looking for?
Well, I think any informed voter would definitely ask a candidate about their perspective on SB 345. SB 345 was legislation sponsored by Senator Pinckney in last legislative session that is going to be refiled and reintroduced in this legislative session, and that is the probation reform bill. The intent of SB 345 is to stop incarcerating individuals for technical violations of probation, meaning if an individual does not commit a new crime, they should not be sent back to jail. There are graduated sanctions that the Department of Corrections can use to address that. In addition to, it would limit all probation terms to just 1 year. Oftentimes, on average, people are sentenced to 18 months probation, and in extreme cases, even 2 years of probation. But we often hear stories of how people either have been violated due to a technical violation of probation or transferred to a new probation officer that sometimes then gets confusing and people's release dates are changed. So where a person is thinking, oh, I just did 2 years, I'm about to be off probation, the new probation officer is saying, no, not so fast, you still have to do this amount of months or this amount of time on probation. So SB 345 will also make it law that the Department of Corrections provide updates to individuals on probation every 90 days as to what their exact release date is from probation and any good time credits that they may have to get off of probation early. So on your way to the polls, before you cast your ballot, definitely ask a candidate if they know about SB 345 and would they support that when it comes out in January.
Thank you, Hanif. John or Shannon, did you have anything to add on that second point? Okay, awesome. Moving. Oh, Shannon, I see you unmuted.
I did.
Go for it.
Because I wanted to answer you and say, no, I don't.
Okay, no worries. All right, well then maybe this next one will hit for you. So true justice reform does not stop with ending mass incarceration. We must also fight to ensure that all individuals with lived experience of the legal system have the opportunity for a real second chance. Again, two-parter. What do the realities of living with a record look like? And we've kind of hit on this a few times throughout the conversation. What has Delaware already done to support the expungement process? And what more is left to do to ensure everyone living with a record has a shot at a second chance? And before we go into this, John, I might ask you to elaborate on what exactly an expungement is, just so that we have a clear idea.
Happy to do that. And then I'll take a first crack, and I'd love to hear what Shannon and Hanif have to say about this question too. So for everybody tuning in through Facebook after the fact, welcome after the fact if you're watching this at a later date, or with us right now on the Zoom, expungement can be a very confusing term. So I'm going to do my best to break it down. An expungement is a process in Delaware in which somebody can apply to have or just receive their record be sealed so that it still exists but is not publicly accessible in record requests that are done by employers, landlords, universities, things like that. somebody has met certain criteria, they're eligible, they then are receiving an expungement that seals that record so it is not publicly accessible. And Mira, I hope that answers the question. One thing I'll say quickly too, just because it's related in this context and it's a common source of confusion, it's another process called the pardon process. They're very closely related, but they are different. Pardon involves the official forgiveness by the state for whatever conviction is being pardoned and a restoration of any rights that were taken from an individual as a result of that conviction. However, after the pardon process, record still exists. It's still publicly visible. It just shows the record and says pardoned. Expungement is where that record is not visible. When that background check is run, it doesn't show up. Anybody who's filling out a form, who's had their record expunged, can legally say, no, they do not have that record or did not receive that conviction. So that's what an expungement is. Now, in terms of lived experience, I got my glasses on for a reason. I'm the nerd on this call. I'm going to talk a little bit about some numbers quickly. And I'm hoping that Shannon and Neef can help me add in a little bit more context. But I think the numbers are important to help you understand. As I said earlier, up to 400,000 Delawareans have a record. After the passage of SB 111 and SB 112, which expanded the mandatory expungement process in Delaware, which is one of 3 ways to get an expungement in Delaware, and made the mandatory process automatic, there are now, according to state data, 290,000 people with a record in Delaware, or with a Delaware record, that are eligible for that process. Again, 290,000 people. That's not everyone with a record. That's just the folks who are eligible for mandatory expungement. So now we're still talking like a third of Delawareans. And what does that mean? That means a third of Delawareans are facing barriers when it comes to applying to jobs, applying for housing, applying for bank loans or credit to start their own businesses, applying for educational opportunities. Not that any of these records are an absolute bar, but 9 out of 10 employers request a background check. 8 out of 10 landlords, 3 out of 4 colleges and universities. And at least in the employment context, when an employer requests a background check, if somebody does have a record, and again, that could just be an arrest that never resulted in a conviction. If somebody has a record, 50% of those cases just never receive another call back. So this just goes to show you that these records, they're not theoretical obstacles. They cause real obstacles, and they cause them in really important ways for people who are trying to just take care of themselves and their families. So I'll pause because, again, nerdy guy with the glasses and the numbers, love to hear what Shannon and Eve have to say too about the impact of records.
Thank you, John. Hanif, you want to go first?
Sure. And what I'll say is, as a person with lived experience and a felony charge on my record, it still impacts the opportunities that are afforded to me even today. So it's sad in Delaware that there is such a stigma and there are so many collateral consequences that come after a person meets all the requirements and finishes all their consequences for any acts that were committed. It's like a lifelong stigma or a lifelong punishment, if you will, in this state if you've ever been convicted of a crime. And I've learned to be strong and to push despite of, but that fact alone discourages and frustrates so many other people. I know so many people who feel like they are just stuck in their current situation, or it's impossible for them to overcome their challenges because they can't get a livable wage job. They can't get the opportunity that they're passionate about, or they can't work in the field that they always wanted to work in due to a mistake that they have done in the past. And to me, true second chances says that you allow a person to have a truly clean slate once they have met all their obligations to the system, once they have served their consequences for their acts. Because smart justice doesn't say you don't hold people accountable, but smart justice says you hold people accountable in a fair way for whatever acts were committed. And then after that is done, you provide a person with resources and opportunities to then have a second chance at being a productive person in society. So I just think that it is an unfair stigma on all people with lived experiences in this legal system. And Delaware especially makes it very, very hard for any individual that has made a mistake or has made a run-in, because let's be clear, everyone who has had a run-in with the legal system in Delaware did not make a mistake. Believe it or not, you have people who have a record, people who have been incarcerated, who are totally and truly honest in what happened. So, yeah, I'll stop there, as Shannon was saying.
Well said, well said. Geez. With lived experience and having a record at a very young age, at 12, and mind you, it was totally by mistake. Me and my girlfriends were hanging out at a clothing store trying on jewelry. We were 12, right? Forgot that a bracelet was on my hand. Went to walk out and they had like an undercover and they snatched me up and my best friend at the time at 12. Okay. I had to serve some community hours, obviously return the bracelet, ring, whatever the heck it was. And there it began. At 12. Now I know many that have started at a much younger age. And because of it, they have encountered obstacles that made them feel less than. So they did not go get their high school diploma. They dropped out, became a hustler, became a person on the streets, became homeless. All of that exists in our world in Delaware. And we can't be blinded by it and just turn the cheek the other way because it doesn't help any of us. Personally, I used it as strength to move forward. I continue to. I'm in the middle of expunging my record. I have 4 DUI felonies, 2 second-degree burglaries. I've been in recovery for 16 years. That was during my addiction. I'm not the same person I once was. And I've had to learn that I don't have to prove that to anybody. And it is a very tough road. There's a lot of naysayers. And because I got sick recently and lost a lot of weight, even more so, people love to attack you when you're down. But not today. Because one thing that Delaware does have a lot of is resources. We have a ton of them. And if somebody says, well, I can't because of, bull. Bull, bull, bull. We are our own worst enemies. And I have proven time and time again that no matter what type of predicament I've gotten myself into, what type of consequence I've had to serve, accountabilities I hold and I do serve them, but I can also move forward. I have 2 small businesses and I am a success by my son's eyes, and that's all that matters.
Thanks, Shannon and Hanif, for adding that additional context, because I think that it's really important. It's something that numbers can't do alone to tell you about the actual impact, because every one of those 400,000 that I mentioned is a person. They're not a digit, it's a person. And so really what we're talking about here is second chances and opportunities for people. And this is, again, something that we do in our own life all the time. People make mistakes. We make mistakes. We develop ways within our families and our communities and our friendships of navigating, being accountable for, and then providing people with an opportunity to have a second chance in that space, to move forwards, to not have to carry a single mistake or mistakes around with us for years and decades. Because as Shannon said, as Hanif said, as I say all the time, who we are today cannot be determined by a piece of paperwork from our past. And that's really what expungements is about. This whole Clean Slate Delaware is about, is trying to make sure that we look at people and treat them as people, evaluate them, who they are today, their skills, their capabilities, their interests of who they are today, not closing doors simply because there's some ink on a piece of paper that supposedly tells the world who somebody is. And that's just not a good way of doing things. And not only is it an inhumane way of doing things, it's bad business to do it that way. Employers are losing out on all sorts of employees who would be excellent solely because of how we use records. So I do want to say that I could talk about expungements for forever. Hanif knows this. I'm going to try not to. But the main thing that I want to say quickly about thinking about what folks can do as they head to the polls or think about expungements is recognize that we have made progress. We have passed bills. There's now this automatic expungement process. Things you can ask individuals you may interact with who are running for office. Do they support expanding mandatory expungement eligibility? Do they support removing barriers to expungement solely due to unpaid fines and fees? Do they support allowing people to expunge records in which they were found, in which they were never convicted? Legal term is terminated in their favor. They were arrested, they were charged, but they were never convicted. They were found not guilty. Again, not convicted. Do they support having those records expunged automatically, regardless of whether somebody may have been convicted of something else in the future? These are all really important things to allow people to move forwards with their lives, to be judged by who they are today. And if you're interested, again, Mira's put together a great website with her coalition, with the coalition partners, that you can see some of those responses from candidates about whether they're committed to these things. Feel free to ask them and let me know what they say.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for that context and for breaking down a really complex and complicated topic and making it understandable. Hanif and Shannon, thank you for sharing your experiences. I just want to actually take a quick second. I know, John, you said you can talk about it all day and you don't want to, but I'm going to take you back to expungements for a quick second so that we can get an answer for Lori, who dropped a question in the chat. Lori's asking if you should get an expungement before a pardon or a pardon before an expungement. And I know this is a confusing process, so hopefully you can shed some light.
Lori, it depends. I know that's not super helpful, but let me try and provide a little bit of context. It's going to depend on a person's record. There are going to be people who can obtain an expungement without being required to get a pardon first. Those are folks who are eligible for mandatory expungement. A list of every conviction that is eligible for mandatory expungement is on the cleanslatede.org website. There are people who are required to get a pardon first. Those folks fall into really two categories. They're either going to have to get a pardon first because their conviction is not eligible for an expungement before they get a pardon. So that's one. That's just a type of conviction that requires a pardon first before being able to petition for a discretionary expungement. The second group of people are folks who have convictions in 2 or more cases. There are now, while we're waiting on governor's signature, potentially going to be a small number of people who are going to have the ability to get an expungement before a pardon, even though they have 2 or more convictions. They have convictions in 2 or more cases. Most people fall into that bucket of having, again, it could be 2 cases for relatively minor things, but if there's a conviction in 2 cases, Delaware requires them to get a pardon first. Again, that could change slightly, but it's still going to be generally true. I wish I could give a simpler answer. This is part of the problem. Our expungement process is really complicated. That's why about 99% of eligible people aren't able to navigate it successfully. I think my probably confusing answer gives you a sense of why. The system is not easy to understand. It's not easy to navigate, but there are resources to help. cleanslatede.org. We can help connect people with the appropriate resource to help them navigate their process.
Thank you so much, John. Sorry, Lori, I wish it was a simpler answer for you, but for the sake of time, I am going to wrap us up here. I want to thank John, Hanif, and Shannon again for taking time out of a Thursday, oh my goodness, out of a Thursday to be with us and to shed some light on why smart justice is such an important issue ahead of the primaries on September 13th and the general election on November 8th. I do just want to reiterate here that pretrial detention and misdemeanors do not restrict voting rights in Delaware. If you are not convicted of a felony, your voting rights are immediately restored after completion of your incarceration, probation, and/or parole, regardless of fines and fees. This is often something that people find confusing or have misinformation about. There are only a few disqualifying felonies, and you can find this really helpful flowchart that lives on our Vote Delaware website as well. And I just want to make that clear because sometimes misinformation becomes the largest barrier to people actually accessing the polls. If you have any questions about any of the topics that we covered here today, please feel free to reach out to contact us. We're happy to speak further about it. I will drop Vote Delaware again for you. I know we've plugged it so many times, but we have 2 more ballot powers coming up on this coming Tuesday and the Tuesday after, talking about immigrants' rights and voting rights. So please join us for those sessions as well, and tell anyone that you know that we are offering CE credit again. Other than that, that's all I have for you tonight. I'll give you 3 minutes of your time back. Thank you again to our panelists. Priya, thank you for doing all the behind the scene work to get this going, and hopefully we see you next Tuesday.